You've heard us talk about the spectacular performance of the Austin apartment market, as well as some really, really good numbers in Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, and San Antonio. But what about the Lone Star State's secondary markets? That's what we're going to take a look at today in today's episode of Apartment Market Dynamics. And with me to do so is the VP for Research Analysis at MPF Research, Greg Willet.
Jay, there are 26 metros in Texas, according to the Census Bureau. Are you ready for a geography quiz here?
Well, I've got a cheat sheet to help me along, but I don't think our good friends watching are going to want to watch us go through all 26. So let's plow right through that and let me get to a question. We've talked about the great performances in the large markets of Texas. We've seen good job growth numbers at the same time that new supply levels are down and apartment demand has been very strong. Are we seeing the same thing in these secondary markets?
By and large, the answer is yes, and let me focus in on the employment part of that. If you need a job right now, Texas is certainly the place to be. As you look across the 26 metros that are in Texas, really only two, the Wichita Falls area and Abilene, had some pretty disappointing employment results during calendar 2011. A couple of other spots where there was a little bit of weakness. One was College Station, but as long as Texas A&M University is there, that one's going to continue to do well on the apartment side. The other one with a little bit of weakness was the Killeen area. Again, you got a mitigating factor there with Fort Hood. So as long as you have that big base of troops there, the apartment market's going to do well in that metro.
And likewise, like with the job numbers, we've seen some very healthy numbers in the secondary markets for the apartment sector. And we're going to focus on a few of the very top performing markets in Texas. And number one on the list, on the west side of the state, number one by a mile, I should say, is Midland, Odessa. Occupancy there is at 98%, incredible, and that is up 2.4 percentage points on an annual basis. And annual rent growth is running at, are you ready for this number? 16%. And you put those figures together, and typical apartment revenues rocketed up 18.4% in 2011. There's only one way to get that kind of revenue upturn in Texas, and that's an energy boom, and that's what's happening here. The new hydraulic fracturing drilling techniques that were developed during the boom in natural gas production a few years ago are now being used for oil extraction as well, and that has led to some significant growth in the Midland, Odessa economy, and we're starting to see job stats look a lot like what we saw in the 70s and the early 1980s. So think about this. Every time you buy gas at the pump, you're helping the apartment market in Midland, Odessa.
And Jay, it's looking like those oil field workers fill their pockets with cash, and then they head to Corpus Christi for a little bit of R&R. As you look at the employment numbers in Corpus Christi, they are really impressive at this point. 7,800 jobs created during calendar 2011. That is stellar 4.3% expansion for a market that has 188,000 total jobs, and 3/4 of the past year's additions are really in two employment sectors. First, the hospitality industry, and then also retailing. So it really is tourism that's pushing those numbers up to such a big degree. If you look at the apartment market, Corpus Christi has occupancy that's currently at 94.5%. That's up a whopping 3.8 percentage points on a year-over-year basis. You combine that occupancy growth with rent increases of more than 8%, and Corpus Christi apartment revenues jumped 11.9% in calendar 2011.
So another big performance. And we'll wrap up the top three with the Valley. And for those of you not familiar with Texas vernacular, that is the McAllen, Brownsville area, which sits right across the border from Matamoros, Mexico. The Valley gained 6,000 jobs in 2011. That's an expansion rate of 1.7%. Whereas Midland, Odessa, and Corpus Christi each have one specific industry that's really driving the job numbers, the recovery has been more broad-based in McAllen and Brownsville. Healthcare and government are two of the biggest contributors, but growth is really coming across the board. And taking a look at the apartment numbers, occupancy in McAllen, Brownsville is at 96.2%. That is up 1.9 percentage points year over year, and annual rent growth is at 4.6%. Put those two figures together and you get revenue growth of 6.5% in 2011.
Jay, I'll point out that when we introduced the topic of strong, smaller apartment markets in Texas, I'm guessing a lot of folks expected us to talk about El Paso, and that one's really not on the list at this point. During the recession, the performance in El Paso was really off the charts, but it has cooled down somewhat since then, and there are a couple of factors there. First is we've had some big expansion at the Fort Bliss Army Base in that metro, but that's pretty much wrapped up there. And the second factor, this is one of the few spots across the country where, in fact, you're getting new supply levels that exceed the historical norm. So that has cooled off the rent growth pace a little bit. As we look at the overall stats for El Paso, they're good, but not great. We've got occupancy currently at 94.5%, solid, but way down from a rate that peaked at 97.7% in early 2010. The rent growth number had gotten all the way up to about 11% on an annual basis at its peak, and now it's down to a pretty modest number, 2.4% annual rent growth in El Paso.
And those El Paso numbers remind us that we should always look at numbers from smaller markets with a little bit of caution. We could see performances shift on a dime, and even with a couple of new large apartment properties coming online in some of these smaller markets, that could cause occupancy rates and even rental rates to come down a little bit. So that's certainly something to give us a little bit of caution about when talking about smaller markets. And that wraps us up for the rundown on Texas secondary markets. So until next time, for Greg Willett and for MPF Research, I'm Jay Parsons. Thank you for watching Apartment Market Dynamics.
Want more? Go deeper with MPF Research's apartment market reports. From a national level, down to individual metros, to specific neighborhoods, MPF Research has been providing unparalleled apartment market intelligence to the multifamily industry for almost 5 decades. Learn more by contacting us at 877-284-4938 or visit www.npfresearch.com and click on Market Reports.